Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we'll be discussing Menachem, Hilchot Parah Adumah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, and the Rambam says as follows: Mitzvah Parah Adumah Shetiya Bashalish Shalom Bas Arba. The mitzvah Parah Adumah is that it should be 3 or 4 years old. Is a Kainuk Shed. If it's older, it's still kosher. We don't wait beyond 3 or 4 because maybe in the course of waiting it'll turn black and it will become invalid. We can't purchase an egla, a calf, before 3 or 4 years old, and raise it and then use it when it becomes of age. And the reason for that is it's based on a pasuk, Shenamar, because it says, V'yikhui lecha para v'loy egla. It says in the Torah, Yikhui lecha para. Para is a cow, not a calf. So what do you do if you found a calf? Matzu egla. If you found a calf, Paiskin oled damim. They decide upon the price to purchase it from the person who owns it. And you keep it in the possession of the owner until it becomes old enough and becomes a cow. And it's purchased from the temple treasury. So the Rambam bases the law that you can't use a calf on a pasuk, on a drasha from the pasuk, para v'loy egla. So the Ravid criticizes the Rambam, and he says, that's not the reason. The reason is there's a halacha that any sacrifice, before it becomes eligible, which is generally at 8 days, you're not allowed to bring it to sanctify it before the 8 days. So the same thing is true with Parah Adumah. It's also called a chatas. It's also considered to be a sacrifice, and therefore, before the zman, before the eligible time, there's a prohibition of sanctifying it. So therefore, that's the reason. You don't need a pasuk, a special drasha, part of v'loy egla. And he says, just like she'ein magdishin balas mum, you can't sanctify it for the Parah Adumah if it's blemished, because it's like a sacrifice. The same thing, if it's lacking, if it's premature, you can't sanctify it. So the Kesef Mishneh defends the Rambam, and he says that if the problem was chusas man, there's a solution for that. You just purchase it without sanctifying it. And when it becomes of age, then you sanctify it. And he says, furthermore, this drasha that the Rambam brings is taken from the Sifri Zuta. It's taken from a Chazal. So there's a little problem with the Kesef Mishneh's argument. And Menachem Zemba, cited in his son's Sefer, Gur Ari Yehuda, says that as soon as you purchase the Parah Adumah, that sanctifies it. And he brings proof to that. So it wouldn't help to purchase it without sanctifying, because that itself is a sanctification. So the question of the Rabbis still remains, but there's a little problem with the Rabbis' question also, because the din of you can't sanctify mechusas man, according to Tosafot and Zvachim, I believe it's Kuf Yud Beis, Tosafot there says that b'diavad, after the fact, if you sanctified a carbon before the zman, it is holy, it becomes sanctified. So that's why the Rambam needs a drasha, because if it would be based on mechusas man, then b'diavad it would be kosher for a Parah Adumah. But because of the drasha, it's not kosher. So we're compelled to say that the Ravid holds and disagrees with Tosafot that even mechusas man, if you sanctify it after the fact, it's still not valid. Therefore, you don't need the drasha. So the question of the Ravid goes back to the Rambam, unless the Rambam disagrees with the Ravid about that, and he holds like Tosafot. But the Menachem Zemba gives a very simple answer. He says that the din of mechusas man, that you can't sanctify something prematurely, so that only applies, Tosafot says, only after it's born. Before the 8 days, if you sanctify mechusas man, it's a prohibition, and according to some, it might not even be valid. That's the dispute. But if it's b'mei imay, if it's an uber, if it's a fetus in its mother's womb, and you sanctified it, it's not prohibited. And the logic of that statement of Tosafot is in Shittim Mekubeses and Zvachim Daf Yud Beis. There he says when something is born already, it's shaykh to be makruf, it's physically shaykh to offer it, and therefore the Torah says don't do it prematurely. But when it's in its mother's womb, it's not possible to sacrifice it. Therefore, the prohibition of sanctifying it prematurely doesn't apply. Or whatever the hesber is, if the Rambam accepts that distinction, that when an uber b'mei imay is not subject to the law of mechusas man, that's why you need the drasha, because if it would be based on mechusas man, it wouldn't apply to sanctifying it, purchasing the Parah Adumah when it's in its mother's womb. Therefore, the Rambam brings the drasha to tell you that even in its mother's womb, if it was sanctified, it's not valid. Why? Because the Torah says it has to be a parah and v'lo egla.